Hello, good morning, good evening, good lunchtime, whatever it is, wherever you are. Welcome to sunny Edinburgh and another episode of the ITSM Explorers. And today we're going to be talking about maturity assessments again. So I think this is probably, we'll be heading towards like 3 hours worth of material on maturity assessments. And that's all going to be available on YouTube. And at the end of the show, we'll give you the link to where that's going to be. But this is a stream, guys. We would love you to tell us where you are today and let us know your name. And you can do that just by dropping stuff into the comments. You can even press some emojis if you want to as well. And that will keep everything going. So already we have international guests, which is great. So hello from France. That's really lovely. I bet you've probably got even better weather than us here in Edinburgh. But thank you for joining us all the way from France, Laura. And we'll give a shout out to anybody else who's joining us as well. So do just drop stuff in the comments and we will bring it on screen, including questions. So anything that you want to ask us, there's a bit of space down the bottom of the screen here, and we can drop in your questions and you can choose to divert the stream. So we kind of have a run off show, but it's up to you to help us direct that, and we can go wherever you want us to. So Claire, thanks for joining us from Edinburgh. So there's 2 of us in sunny Edinburgh, which is wonderful. But I've also got somebody sitting in Essex who wants to join in. So
Hello,
Steve Morgan. Have you got a sunny day in Essex?
I've got a wonderful day. It is very lovely here. It's about 30 degrees. The sun's out. It's wonderful. And here I am talking about ITSM maturity assessments. Where did it all go wrong, Martin?
What we should do is a brief intro to both of us here. For those who don't know us, because we've known each other for quite a while. I should also say that both Steve and I have got people with chainsaws outside the front door. I don't think that's anything threatening that we've done previously, but people seem to have decided to cut down trees outside our houses. So a quick intro to me. I've been in IT service management for as long as I can remember. Way back in the 80s, I started off on a service desk. I have done every related job, including project management and implementing service desks and working for 3 different vendors and running ITSM events as well, where I've seen billions and billions of presentations and best practice and worked with lots of lovely people. And in fact, Steve has spoken for me up in Edinburgh before. So that's my brief intro. We shoot through the brief intros because we know we're going to rabbit on too long. Steve.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I run a service management consulting firm called Syniad IT. We help organizations with things like maturity assessment, process design. We help them with tool selection and all those challenges which IT leaders find. Specialize in service integration and management, SIAM, operating models. Probably a subject for a future episode. So keep tuned in for that. But yes, nearly 3 hours, 4 hours on maturity assessments tells me that I'm probably not someone that you ought to get stuck in a lift with, but it's passion. We're all passionate about this. It's important stuff for us. So thanks for joining, everybody. It's great to have you on board.
Right, guys, a quick review of what we've done to date. So, as you may have gathered, a lot of this relies on me pressing the right buttons at the right time. So if anything goes wrong, it's entirely my fault, and I haven't pressed the right buttons. But so far, so good. So what have we talked about before in the last 2 hours worth of material? Well, to start off with, we talked about selecting a particular type of assessment and the method of that assessment. And we went through some of the different ones that are available to you, and you wouldn't believe how many different ones there are. I think we found at least half a dozen different categories of assessment, right from individual downloaded web type assessments where you just get a whole bunch of questions, you answer them yourself, and then that's you done. That is marking your own homework. That is unidimensional. That is not really very good. And we then went on to talk about other types of assessment, right through the sort of ranking type assessments where you may get stars or gold, silver, bronze or something like that, and talked about all of those different elements. And then also about adaptive assessments, whereby you get a consultant in, the likes of Steve, who has got experience in the game and is able to actually provide a consultative approach to assessments and to focus those assessments on a particular area that you desire to improve on, rather than just everything, which is what a lot of assessments do. So over to you, Steve. The next thing says scope. How do you start defining scope?
Yeah, we talked about scope in a number of different facets, didn't we? We talked about what is it you're going to look at. So are you just going to focus in on where you think the pain points are? So, for example, incident and problem and change are quite common things. Or are you going to look more broadly? And often that's where some of the buried treasure is hidden, to relate back to our ITSM Explorers name tag. Because often it's deficiencies in some of those other processes that cause the pain further down the line, like service design and transition, causing incidents, for example. So it's not incident that's broken, it's service design and transition, but you might not have thought to look there. So that's one facet of it. And then the other thing you want to think about is don't just look from a process perspective, but you need to look at it from an organization, a people skills point of view, as well as governance, as well as the underpinning tooling, and the overarching kind of culture within which the organization is operating. So lots of facets to scope, not quite as simple as choose from these 12 processes and we'll ask you 20 questions. It's a little bit more in depth than that, because as we've said, deficiencies in some process areas cause issues in others. So yeah, there was a lot to cover on scope, Martin. I think we probably made that a 30 conversation, didn't we?
I think we probably did. And the next one's quite a long one as well, though. Teamwork. And when I'm talking about teamwork on assessments, initially I just mentioned there, people quite often think it's just one person who fills in the form and the assessment's done. To get a real broad-ranging assessment that actually tackles lots of different areas, well, if you're going to do something like that, you need to involve a lot of different people. So if you're going to dig in depth in a particular area, then you need to be speaking to an expert in that area, and the person speaking to them also needs to be an expert in that area. And that's where you'll start to get value out. And also, in terms of teamwork, you want to involve stakeholders from all the different areas that you touch with the assessment. So all too often we see IT are doing an assessment and they ping out a whole bunch of questions to people, and there is no rhyme nor reason to the end recipient of why they're filling out this assessment. So they need to get bought in. They need to understand why they're doing the assessment and what the potential impact and benefit is for them for completing and you taking some of their time. So that's one element of teamwork. And I think, Steve, you came up with some great stories about bringing teams together in terms of grouping people together for assessment evaluation. So perhaps 30 seconds on the benefits of bringing people together.
Yeah, we do like it. We do like to do that. I think the benefit of doing it is that you can ask a question. If there's 5 people in the room, you're going to get lots of different answers. So rather than asking one person and they say, "Oh yes, we've got a very good process around categorizing incidents," get broader opinion, get some disagreement, and ultimately what you're looking for is some discussion rather than just a binary answer, because that's where the treasure is. It's in the discussion that happens when you ask the question rather than in the tick box that's ticked on the form that we've already said is not a great idea to do.
And I think the bit that I like about that is you're already achieving some sort of a consensus by having the discussion with the team members.
Indeed.
Whereas if they're just ticking a form sitting in a box on their own, then maybe they'll not get the opinion from Paul or Jane or Claire or Lara, whoever it may be, that is very valuable and a sort of a different viewpoint that might adjust your feelings on that particular area. So I love the idea of bringing people together. And another one that I think that you had mentioned actually, which I thought was particularly interesting, is the challenges. We discussed the challenges on our last go around with assessments, and one of those is it's never the right time to do an assessment, and
No.
I don't have enough time to do an assessment. And I think you came up with a sort of a way to turn that round when someone says they haven't got enough time to do an assessment. So let's recap on that one, if you remember what it is, of course.
I remember what it was. So yeah, I think it's a common challenge, right? There's never a good time to do an assessment. We're always too busy. We've always got the next big project, the next big thing that's coming along. And the way that I seek to try and turn that around is, well, if we do the assessment, we might find out the reasons why you're so busy. And that actually might, in the short term, help alleviate some of that workload, because you're often a large element of your work, and those of you who are watching can agree or disagree with this in the comments, is largely firefighting, right? We all have a plan of all the work we're going to do, and then reality comes along and changes that plan. And hopefully doing the assessment can help remove some of that unpredictability that occurs that spoils all of our best laid plans.
And I guess as well as the improvements that may make your life easier as well, it perhaps even may result in you recommending as the Mr. Assessment that more resources are applied to a particular area.
Yes.
That basically lets people have a little bit more time to themselves. So a question.
Absolutely.
A question here. A question from Lara. What
Hi.
about how do you incentivize people to do the assessment, to take part in the assessment?
I think you've got to be able to sell the benefits and demonstrate what the benefits are likely to be. So we've just talked about one of them there. We're all busy. Let's try and remove some of the unpredictability in our lives by maybe looking at the sizing of the team, or looking at the efficiency of the processes, or the way that we're working within our tooling. And there is treasure, there is gold to be found in them there hills. By doing the work, you will uncover what those opportunities are. By not doing it, you are just constantly in that cycle. So I would incentivize people, Lara, by saying, let's break out of the cycle. We need to stop and pause, do this assessment activity, because that helps us break out of this cycle. There's an AA Milne quote, and I will misquote it, about Winnie the Pooh coming down the stairs on his head. The only way that he's always gone down the stairs is on his head. He doesn't know any other way. If only he could stop for long enough to think about a different way to go down on his head. Or down the stairs, rather. I told you I'd misquote it. But you get the general idea. Aren't we all just bouncing along in our day-to-day jobs on our heads, being thrown about all over the place? Isn't there a better way? Isn't there an easier way? Well, we'll never know if we don't take that opportunity to stop, assess, and look at what all the alternatives might be.
That sounds like I should have had a graphic for that. That's sort of Winnie the Pooh bouncing. Okay.
There is
maybe
the graphic. I would credit one of my big mentors, Vernon Lloyd, from many years ago, who had an amazing graphic about that, and we used it on repeat in ITIL training courses many years ago when I was at the front of the class doing the training. Not doing quite so much of that activity nowadays.
Well, I think one of the other things we could potentially do, and I think it's a good question from Laura, is play back some examples of previous outcomes from other customers of a similar type. So let's say it was an NHS organisation. You say, "Oh, all right, we've been into one before, and when we were talking to this Hampshire Trust or whatever it may be, these are the sort of outcomes that we had there," and play those back so that people can say, "Oh, right, okay, so they changed this. That was the outcome. And it might have taken them 6 months to get there, but it improved the situation."
Yeah.
So I've got another question here, and it's so big that I can't see it all. And I'm going to bring it onto my screen anyway. And we'll read it. Right. It's from Ben, and I'll read this to you because Steve can't see in the same way the live comments coming in. So he's saying, "Here is Edward Bear coming down the stairs now. Bump, bump, bump on the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming down the stairs. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. And then he feels perhaps there isn't." So thanks, Ben. Thanks for Googling that. I think Ben's in Thailand, actually, if I read my profiles correctly. So we're reaching out all over the world. But let's move on to the next slide, where we start to talk about the sort of planning bit, which is the main part of today's discussion. So this one. Outputs, baseline, progress, and reports. So suddenly, and this isn't a mistake, suddenly our road is going round and round in circles. And that really is sort of to reflect the way an assessment works. So if you think an assessment's going to start at point A and finish at point B, it doesn't. It goes round and round in circles, and there are different elements and progressions within that journey, and it is a journey. But it tends to start off with the outputs from assessment number 1. So, Steve, take us through the kind of outputs we might expect to see from an assessment, but more particularly, I guess, how you rank all those outputs, because frequently when you get an assessment, there's 50 different things come out at the end of it, and you think, what am I going to do with all of these? Because we can't implement them all. So take us through that.
Let me tell you about what good looks like from our perspective then. So we already talked about data capture in a previous episode, and we talked about sitting down and having a chat with you, a bit of a conversational, adaptive conversation. And out of that comes some observations. So the first thing you see is some commentary in a report that says, these are the things that we observed. And we get consensus on that with the people that we've been dealing with in the client, and also for our sponsors as well. And then the real crux of the report comes, well, what from those observations, what are the recommendations? And we would present those recommendations in a number of different ways. these aren't options, these are what we do each time. So we would produce an Excel spreadsheet which lists all of the recommendations and categorizes them. And I'll come back to that categorization in a moment, Martin, because that was your question. And the second thing we'd do is put them in some kind of graphic so that they could be visually looked at in terms of their amount of effort, the things you need to do first. So we need to put them in some kind of timeline. And then we may well, in a lot of cases, not in every case, but produce a graphical roadmap as well that has the key programs of work on it. So we can say there's 5 big blobs of activity that you now need to do. One's around tooling, one's around process, and so on. And would give a sense of the things that are in each program of work. So let's go back to the categorization. We would categorize them by how quickly you need to do them, so their priority, in other words, how much effort is involved in doing it. So is it a small piece of work, a big piece of work, or a very big piece of work? The effect or impact of doing it. So by doing this, what change are you likely to see? And in some cases, we might also add, and whether it's something you can do on your own or whether it involves other suppliers as well, because you've got to try and mobilize not just you, but perhaps other organizations you're working with or other stakeholder groups in your organization. And then with that information and some very gifted Excel people, of which I am not one, but I am very fortunate to stand on the shoulders of Excel giants, and that they can produce lots of lovely graphics that say, these are all your recommendations, and you've got these high priority items which are low effort but high impact, for example. These are things which you can do on your own and are high priority and high impact, etc. So you can cut those categories in different ways to help the organization visualize the program of work that's then going to hopefully start. And I've talked already about my aversion to shelfware, and I would tend to have a little bit of an unwritten contract with the customer to say, if I do all of this for you and produce this assessment with all these recommendations and some lovely shiny charts, you are going to do something with it, aren't you? And tend to kind of make them at least shake my hand or nod and smile in all the right places before we embark on all of that. So I think that kind of forms the basis of those outputs, Martin. What do you think?
I think I'm going to add some more questions in there too. So I'm thinking about balancing that big spreadsheet out and the factors that you can put into the spreadsheet, because I think there's a lot of factors that can go in there, and you've already mentioned some as well. But things like quick wins, medium wins, long wins.
Yeah.
So that is something that I've certainly factored in the past, because it's all very well saying, this is a fantastic thing that we need to do, but if it's going to take 3 years to do, then maybe you pick up some low-hanging fruit, for want of a better description.
I agree with that, but I'd also add in the need for sustainable wins.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Whilst it's tempting to go, oh, look, those things are really easy and they're going to have a quick impact, there's, to Lara's point around incentivization and buy-in, the worst thing that you can do is tackle 10 of your easy recommendations, which either A, have no impact, or B, have no sustainability, and they fall by the wayside in the longer term. So I agree with you, going for the low-hanging fruit is very attractive, but you mustn't get caught up in that, and you've got to make sure that your low-hanging fruit recommendations are also sustainable as well.
Yeah, and I think people need to know that they're low-hanging fruit recommendations as well.
Yes.
There's a level of expectancy that you need to set as well. Because
Indeed.
One of the issues which I found with assessments is you do an assessment, here's a bunch of recommendations, and then people think they're all going to be done. The whole lot, everything that's on the list of things that you've identified is going to be done, not just some of the recommendations. But how do you feel about also involving stakeholders in terms of ranking of those outputs? So voting,
yes.
letting them vote for things that they really want, as opposed to things that you want to do.
One of the things I once did, and it was one of the best things I ever did, was spent £50, which is a lot of money
For
on
Steve, it is.
it is, yeah, because I'm tight as anything. On very large A5 size post-it notes. And the reason why they were such a good investment is if you do have the opportunity to go through those recommendations with the stakeholders, you can write the recommendations on a great big post-it note and get them to argue about where it sits on that axis that we talked about in terms of priority, impact, effort, etc. And as I always say about these things, especially things like, for example, the creation of RACI diagrams, the benefit is not necessarily in where the post-it note ends up sitting on the chart, although that's quite important. But the benefit is in the conversation that occurs to reach the conclusion. So you get buy-in, you get consensus, and you get commitment to do it. So those post-it notes were a good investment. I also have a very, very giant egg timer, which I then use to time the conversation as well. So we say, well, look, come on in, you've got 4 minutes to make your mind up. And that's a good tool sometimes to save the conversation taking 3 days rather than 3 minutes.
I think we need one of those for this show, don't we?
I think we do. I'm hoping you're all still with us, guys, in the comments. If you need us to move on or you've got any questions, then feel free to jump in and let us know.
Yep, do that. Now, you've made a hole for yourself there, which you've mentioned RACI diagrams. So you need to now explain to the world what they are, and then perhaps also throw in some other methodologies, Six Sigma or something like that. Now, some of these things which can be used to help you decide what to do. What are those type of tools?
Right. So the RACI diagram in particular, you can Google this. I have a blog post on my website about RACI posts. We'll drop it in the comments underneath at the end of the program. But the RACI diagram just is a means of assigning responsibility, accountability, consulted or informed, and sometimes supporting. So you can have a RASCI as well, to a set of activities. And why it's important is in the context of assessments in two means. Number one, you can use a RACI to say, well, what we're going to do with the output then, and who's responsible for which. But you can also do it in terms of actually, you might get a recommendation to develop a RACI for a particular process area. For example, change management, because it isn't clear who's doing what today, and therefore use a RACI. In terms of other methodologies, Martin, thanks for not briefing me on that question. Caught me well on the hop there. You should absolutely consider all different, and you can tell I'm playing for time here. All different options that you might want to use. All things that need to be in your toolbox. You could use. When you're doing process design, lean activity, for example, to cut out the dead time, so to do that lean analysis. You could use Six Sigma as a means of measuring your improvement activities and your approach to the whole means around quality. The ISO standards are a good source of content in terms of what you should be aiming for in terms of a standard. So you should be looking at ISO 20000 and ISO 9000 and some of the other ones around, I think there's a 15400 around continuity, business continuity. There's lots of very good tools in your toolbox. I'm not going to go into more depth because I think that's probably a whole conversation that we can have once we've given it a little bit more thought and we give people a bit more of a structured response on that one.
Yeah, and I think that's hours and hours and hours of discussion. But I needed once you've mentioned it, I need to get the clarification in there.
It's my own fault. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't do it again.
No, I'll try not to.
So we've got a whole bunch of outputs. we refined them into sort of recommendations, and we may have had some voting of some description going on there as well to involve the stakeholders, which I think is a great idea. And we've also want to maybe, I'm sure we throw into that balance of that spreadsheet cache as well, because that's always going to be a big deal. Are there things that you can change that reduce costs? Are there investments that you can make that will help improve other areas? And again, that becomes sort of a balanced spreadsheet element of that. How much does it cost to make the improvements as well? Because some of them will involve a lot of resource time. So I guess the cash factor isn't just about cost savings, it's about cost spendings as well, because you need to balance the time factors and any other associated software or anything else that's involved in achieving some of those outputs to understand what the true benefit is at the end of the day. So yes, we can save £50,000 by deploying a piece of software, but it's actually going to cost us £60,000 in terms of buying the software and the resource to implement it. So I think outputs are not necessarily black and white in terms of the list of things. It is about this consultative process and going through it to balance all of those outputs to get to a position with that probably very complicated spreadsheet that you are able to offer out the wins and loses to all of the particular parties involved in terms of getting buy-in from everybody, which is the total and utter goal, is to get buy-in from everybody. What we've done was a good idea. These outputs are a good idea, and taking them forward is a good idea, rather than, as you've described, doing the process and then leaving everything on the shelf. So taking them forward, you've now got the recommendations. There are agreed recommendations. Who does the work? Who is responsible for the work? How do you structure like assigning actions and assigning responsibility, assigning ownership, those sort of things? How do you address that?
So it's a good consulting answer, this one. The answer is it depends.
I knew it was going to be it depends.
So let's talk about the fact
I should have a special button I press when you say it depends.
It depends. Well, it does depend. So it depends on a number of things. So let's talk about real world and real client examples. So I have a fantastic client. They must be my favorite client, because we assess them every 6 months. They have a dedicated continual improvement team. They take our recommendations and manage those programmatically, so that when we go back and do a further assessment, they can demonstrate very quickly the progress they've made, whether the items are closed or not. We often act as a bit of an arbiter or an assurer on those. When they say they've closed them, we say, well, show me what you've done then, and is that good enough? What's the evidence that supports it? So that's a way of doing it. More commonly, organizations wouldn't have the luxury of a continual improvement team, but they might have, for example, and I'm thinking of another client here who has a contractor who they hire, who manages the recommendations for them. He's not a subject matter expert, but he can manage the completion of actions on a spreadsheet. I have another client who uses the timing of our assessment to their advantage and hires a summer intern to manage the improvement program. That's from the local college doing a business or technology course. They come in for the summer, and for 3 or 4 months, you have some focus on it from someone who's keen as mustard and has a ton of enthusiasm and a lust to learn. So that's quite good. Often we manage it on behalf of the client. So that is a double-edged sword, because arguably we are then marking our own homework in terms of the recommendations. But often we are the ones with the knowledge that can help them determine what they need to do to actually go about the recommendation, because often the biggest challenge with a recommendation is they understand it, but they don't know how to implement it. No, so it might be, I don't know, we might say, refine your categorization model for incident tickets because it's really messy and doesn't actually help you very much. And they might go, oh, yeah, I understand that, but well, what are my options then? How do I go about doing that? We might say, well, we don't want to have any categorization model at all, which is quite a new thing I've started to see emerge. But anyway, we might help them on that basis. So I think there's a number of different ways that you can do it. The worst of which is the final end of my kind of continuum here in terms of quality and how you manage all of this stuff. At the bad end of it, I think, is the person who is given it by somebody in their organization to manage has already got a really full workload, and it's a bit of a bind, and they pick it up every now and again and have a quick look at it, and over time, the interest in it dwindles, and everyone's really relieved to see it go away because it is actually quite a lot of effort, and therefore, it's better to ignore it than to do it. And I think I see that commonly too, and often we're called in to help rekindle those improvement efforts where they have kind of responsibility has dwindled.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting to note, just from what you've just said there, the different models, basically. So here's a bunch of outcomes, and here's a bunch of stuff you can do. Here's a bunch of outcomes, and here's what we can do for you, which is the opposite way round. But when we get into the second model there, there's some sort of skepticism that you'll continuously do an assessment and produce things that you can do for the client. And therefore it becomes an ATM for the consultant effectively. And there's can be skepticism around all of that.
Yeah. And I was chatting yesterday to a client because I've in Cinead we have some commandments. There are a number of commandments that we live by, and number one is you must always do what's best for the client, and that can often mean turning work away or not doing the bit of work that's going to generate more revenue or whatever, because we do what's best for the client. And that always ends up as the right thing to do because it pays the dividends to us ultimately in trust and credibility and all those other really important factors that clients look for when they're looking for a trusted advisor to work alongside them. So I'm sure there are organizations who perhaps don't have that commandment who will very happily turn your organization into an ATM to do that continual improvement activity. But it's I'd rather work with a bit of integrity and a bit of an eye on the longer term relationship rather than the quick buck.
I think I might need to put that into my sort of mission statement or something, because I love that the commandment. I'm, as you know, much the same myself. If somebody came to me and asked for a software solution, a recommendation, I'm only going to recommend the ones that I believe are correct for the job, not ones that necessarily are the best for me in terms of financial gain. But we're maybe a little unusual from that perspective.
Well, maybe we're a dying breed, Martin.
I think that's probably it. Talk about dying breeds. We better keep going here because otherwise the conversation time will run out, and I know you've got a hard stop. So
yes,
the next one along was baseline. The only reason I put that in there is it's so common for people to not take a baseline and to jump straight into the improvement activities, and then they're going to have a really hard job demonstrating the next element, which is the progress, which I'm going to throw back over at you again and say, in terms of measuring progress, obviously we could do another assessment, but is there kind of interim KPIs or something like that we can look at to try and monitor our progress as we run through a structured continuous service improvement plan?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head, Martin. That is exactly it. So in that baseline activity, what we're talking about there is traditional process-related, business outcome-related key performance indicators. In other words, something that you can then use as a baseline to measure progress against. So I'd be looking for a progress indicator as has the performance of the KPI improved. So to bring that to life, you might say first time fix rate at the desk is a KPI, and I've just plucked that one out at random. It might not be the best example, but the aim being that we might have some recommendations that we know are going to impact that KPI. So if we implement those recommendations and we have a baseline measure from which to start, we should be able to relate the improvement that's been brought about by the implementation of the recommendation directly to the increase in the performance of the KPI. And that's in simple terms what I'm trying to manage there. So that, other than these tire prints on your roadmap here that go round and round in circles that look a bit like my local supermarket car park, I must admit.
After you've been driving around it.
I've been driving around it on 11 o'clock on a Friday evening.
That's Essex for you, right?
Yes, yeah, take the boy out of Essex. But anyway, but you know that baseline and progress one are really joined up very, very closely, right? You need to establish that baseline, understand what they are. You can't go back once you've implemented the recommendation and prove that it's worked unless you've got a baseline from which to start. Does that sound? I know that just sounds really obvious, but it's the obvious things that often clients, it's not obvious to them. So I've stated it, and if you're sitting there listening to this thinking that's the most obvious statement Steve's ever muttered on one of these events, it might well be, but it isn't as obvious as you might think.
Yeah, and that's really why I included it, because I've seen it missed so many times. People get engaged and they get enthusiastic and they run off, and no. Let's do a baseline before you go running off doing all the new improvements because they're the shiny new thing that you've seen and you want to grab hold of it. So that takes me on to the next one as well, which is reporting. Now, the reason I put that in there, because it's the other end of the scale where people also forget to do. And I'm not talking about just producing a bunch of reports. I'm talking about we've got outputs, we've had a baseline, we've got progress. Tell somebody about it, right? So tell your stakeholders what you have done, what you have achieved, how that's going to impact them, the benefits that they're going to see out of that. They will want to know and will be pleased to know. But so often I see it that people forget to actually market the results of the assessment to people. So you need to market this assessment all the way through from day one to get people's buy-in, then the progress that you're making during the implementation work or the changes or whatever's going on, but then also the end results of that. Because ultimately what that will allow you to do is to say, look at what we've achieved in the last 6 months, 9 months, 12 months against these outputs from that assessment. And then you will probably get the opportunity to get buy-in and go again and actually have continual service improvement, which is the goal, right? That we continuously try to get better and better as time goes on.
Laura, if you're still there and we haven't bored you to death, that's a really good way of incentivizing people as well, right? By having that reporting cycle so that you can demonstrate the progress that you've made. For anyone who hasn't detected it, I'm suffering from hay fever, so I'm going to drop myself on mute for a moment and blow my nose because I've managed 44 minutes, but I'm starting to struggle now. So give me one second.
I'm going to press a button.
Okay. Seamless. I don't think anybody noticed.
Nobody noticed. I can cut that out in post-production.
Good.
I've cleverly put all these transitions in so that I can do post-production. So when we get to do the YouTube stuff and I have enough time, I will chop out little bits and pieces. So this slide is kind of, the end of part one of our journey and failure and success in terms of an IT service management assessment. I want to know what that looks like, but before I do, I've just noticed I created this graphic and I've got the big green success pointing at you and the big yellow failure pointing at me. So I don't Actually, I can change that round. You know, I can move myself over
Yeah.
here to.
Yeah, well, you want to
Okay.
be on my side, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
come over here.
I'll come over
Here.
to the success bit, right? Okay.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I can move
Very good.
myself about, but you know what's coming
Yeah.
here. I'm going to ask you for your top 5 tips,
Yes.
summarizing the nearly 3 hours that we've been talking about. What are your top 5 takeaways from maturity assessments?
Here's some I prepared earlier, Martin. So number 1, define the scope. We talked about it earlier on. Think about not just the list of processes, but also the depth that you're going to go to from people, process, tooling, governance. That's critical. Dude, if you do that wrong, you might as well not bother. Number 2, make the time. There is never a good time to do this. You will never ever find a good time. So suck it up and figure out that there is a different way to bump down the stairs for those of you who were watching the reference earlier. Third one, do it in depth, right? Don't do the download off the internet and tick the box and say, yeah, we've got away with it. If you're going to do it properly. So do an in-depth one. Get someone clever to come along. And if you can't find someone clever, then I'll do it for you. But in essence, do it properly. Measure and manage the progress. Don't stick it on the shelf, because we're all really lovely people, and I do have clients who say, "Oh, do you remember that really nice bunch of people we had from Cinead who came in and did that assessment? Whatever happened to all of that activity?" So if you're going to do it, measure it, manage it, and do something with the outcome. And then the final thing I had was assign ownership. So have one single person who's accountable for making sure the assessment happens, for making sure the outcomes get managed and tracked and monitored, and manages ultimately that continual improvement program. If you choose to give ownership to lots of different people, ultimately it will wither and die. So don't do that. Have a champion, one person who's got their a single throat to choke. We like to refer to that person as, but yeah, they need a bit of investment in it to make it work. Those are my top tips, Martin.
So a champion basically is what you're talking about. Have a champion within
Yeah.
the client, a champion of the assessment, and get them to be the person who I keep talking about, you know, marketing this and marketing that and reporting that. Somebody needs to do that. And I think that having a champion for your assessment is a great way to do that. So I think if I'm going to give one tip, that would be it, is to have a champion within your organization for the assessment and get them to run round, you know, rah everywhere about this assessment, making sure that people not only are bought into it in the first place, but are bought into it all the way through the process and see the benefits for it. And if you want to know more about some of our stuff, you can go back and have a look at stuff on YouTube. We'll come to that in a minute. But before we do, we're running fast up against the end time. So thanks, Ben, Lara, and Clara for joining us, and all of the people who have signed up. I think there's 100-odd people who are watching these things on repeats and stuff like that. So that's pretty amazing. We're going to go on to do a load more episodes. We'll talk about that in a second. But let's do a little transition. Press another button. So we have that sort of treasure theme going on and finding unused treasure. This is our sort of 1 minute blatant plug at the end of every show, where I have to say that I am also a Freshworks partner, as well as running these shows. If you want to know more about my organization, or you're into buying a new piece of software, then click on the Dewdrop, or rather scan the Dewdrop QR code up there. If you're not connected to either myself or Steve on LinkedIn, then the green elements there, go scan those with your phone and get on. And then the last one, where we have some robot automation going on, is Steve's website. If you follow that link, you're going to find that he's very kindly put together a sort of a white paper type assembly on his website, which sort of summarizes everything that we've been talking about in terms of maturity assessment. So follow these links. You can go back and watch this, obviously, by finding it on LinkedIn. But hang on. Hurrah! We actually have a YouTube channel now set up. It's a fledgling YouTube channel, but we'd love you to go over there, have a look, hit the big subscribe button, or in fact, it's a very little subscribe button, but hit the subscribe button, hit the like buttons for anything that you see up there. You've got the full replays of the shows that we have done for the last couple of weeks. So there's nearly 3 hours worth of stuff specifically about maturity assessment. But we're going to go on to do a whole load more because we seem to be super popular at the moment. And we're going to be talking about things like service desk tooling and selecting a new product and transitioning to a new service desk and things like that. So we both, between us, we've got like 60 years worth of experience of doing all this stuff. And we're only just approaching 40. So the math doesn't really work there. But
I don't know how that happens. Yeah, I started working.
That's because you're not good with spreadsheets, Steve. So, but
that'll be it.
Anyway, so really what I just wanted to say is thanks everybody for joining us. This stuff will be up on YouTube. I will be curating the channel a little bit. There's also a bunch of old shows from last year, beginning of last year, where I ran about 12 different interviews with the likes of Chris Pope and Claire Agata and a bunch of other people. So they're up there too if you want to go back the way. But if you're particularly interested in the maturity assessments, this will be loaded up today. Go watch it with your friends and family. The other night, in fact, last night, I was just having a quick look at YouTube on my own TV in the kitchen, big 50-inch TV, and it chose to offer me to watch me, which was a bit weird.
Oh.
So the show came up on the big 50-inch telly in full HD, glorious sound, and that was all a bit weird. But if you really want to sit around your dinner table with your family and friends and watch this stuff, you can. I don't recommend that you do that. So,
yeah, cool.
So last word, Steve. Just say join us next time. That'll do, because then we'll play an outro and you can go to your 1 o'clock meeting.
Join us next time. Then we'll play an outro and we'll go to the 1 o'clock meeting. Good to see you, everyone.
Guys. Thanks, everyone.